and welcome to Did Nothing Wrong Live, the show that cuts through the noise and helps you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke, and with me are Jay McKenzie and Carl Folk. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the New Year's Day car attacks, as well as Trump's about-face on TikTok, and we'll also be covering the battle between Steve Bannon and Elon Musk and the greater implications. Keep listening to learn more, and remember, smash those like and subscribe buttons for us. Thanks for tuning in. Let's go ahead and get started. The first big piece of news in 2025 was the New Year's Day terrorist attack in New Orleans. At least 14 people are dead and 35 people were injured after a man drove a truck into a crowd at Bourbon and Canal Streets, according to the FBI. They also confirmed the identity of the suspected truck driver as Shamsuddin Jabbar, age 42, of Texas. That was red meat for the right-wing news media, as they immediately decided that it was an ISIS cell, and that the truck had come across the Mexican border in Eagle Pass, Texas. None of this turned out to be true, but it certainly helped reinforce a pre-existing narrative. Carl, what do you think they're trying to accomplish here?
Well, this has been kind of their standard line of attack, right? But this is getting amped up now in a way that they didn't have the ability to before, and it's all BS, right? Like,
Right.
we understand now that this is a U.S. citizen, military veteran, and someone who, appears to have been radicalized. And the beginning of this is really tough. It's a super fluid environment, so there's a bunch of stuff floating around pretty much immediately. But the right has keyed in on something really dark here, right? Like they're starting to really tie that attack to the border and to an amorphous kind of enemy within that Trump actually mentions in his post on Truth Social that's been making the rounds now. But he says at one point they are incompetent and corrupt, having spent all of their waking hours unlawfully attacking their political opponent, me, rather than focusing on protecting Americans from the outside and inside. Violent scum that has infiltrated all aspects of our government and our nation itself. There's some really clear language here that is only used for one reason, and it's to stoke violence.
Right.
This isn't necessarily new for them, but this definitely has presented them an opportunity that's pretty grotesque, and they're using it, or attempting to. And tying it to the border, this is just one of their playbook items now, right? That anything that can be will be used to push one or two different lines, and one of the big ones is open borders.
Right. And I noticed that they made sure to get the specific places and the specific references in that they wanted to talk about. Like, Eagle Pass. They spent so much time and energy talking about Eagle Pass earlier last year. They talked about the waves and waves of illegal immigrants coming across, and they've gotten their audience conditioned to react a certain way when they hear certain words. Springfield, Ohio probably conjures up certain images for their audience as well. And Eagle Pass is another one of those places that they spent so much time and energy pushing that the minute you say Eagle Pass, they know what to think. They've already been prepped for all of this.
Absolutely. No, and that's part of it, right? Like this thing is part of a larger narrative they've constructed over the last few years, and Eagle Pass is a part of it. The tying of the FBI and DOJ into it, and then him also saying that the CIA should be used internally because of it, is all somewhat consistent with what they've been saying, right? But in differing forms, kind of over the last few years, really loudly, but over, this is a long time coming.
Definitely.
Well, they spent so long talking about caravans, and every midterm and then the presidential election, it always would ramp back up. Fox News would suddenly have 10 guys at the border showing you all the images, all stirring everything up as much as they possibly could. And then at a certain point they said, well, look at how easy it would be to put an extremist, an Islamic extremist, someone who's going to come here and is going to commit terrorist acts. And they really have been looking for follow through there because they built it up and talked about it. There hasn't been any connection, and there's still not a connection because, again, an American citizen, but
right.
It's enough. It's enough that's been built up, that's been talked about, and now they've finally decided to cash in, and this is what you get.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a huge part of it, and they're also, I mean, this is just a continuation on of a bunch of the narratives that have been floating around the Fox News extended universe for 25 years, right? Like this is a continuation on of the George W. Bush II White House's view of Islamic terrorism being kind of next to immigration, and really, that tie is pretty explicit from those years, and this is just kind of a rehashing of that in the most reactionary way possible, right?
The Democrats won't say radical Islamic terrorism. They won't say it.
Oh God, what a time that was.
One thing they've done, and that essentially makes this global, and it's a narrative that can be used by Le Pen in France or Farage in the UK, is, well, something has happened in Europe where you had all of these refugees from Syria, and a few terrorists did sneak in, and there were some major violent attacks, and the biggest of these were 2015, 2016. But there have been more, and I mean, there's the bombing in the UK, but like it's not that it's not real, but it's this idea that, well, okay, it happened in Europe. These refugees came from Syria. Why couldn't it happen here? Why couldn't theoretically it happen here? And so they built it up, and now they have their payoff. And you look at the UK and France and the AfD in Germany, which Elon Musk now suddenly supports and has gone all in with. It's just reinforcing those narratives, and they do spread in all of the far right circles in every major Western country.
Well, exactly. And I mean, this is like, kind of one of the many beating hearts of the international fascist movement, right? Like this immigration claim, this lie that immigrants are, showing up and taking all aspects of kind of, quote, traditional society wherever you are. It's kind of one of the main facets of this franchise fascism problem, right? Like they use this explicitly kind of as a doorway. And, you see it really well represented, like in what happened in Britain this summer with the white supremacist riots, right? Like that was an outgrowth of the same language, just for that particular market, and it works extremely well, and I think Trump and the crew of Republicans that he's with see that as a facet, right? Not a bug. And so you couple all this together into one cake pan, and this is a recipe that they've been nursing to where we are today for one reason, right? Like this inherently has one goal, which is dehumanization and then the accompanying violence that comes with dehumanization.
Right. And you can see that in the second big news story of 2025 that hit, which was somebody evidently rented a Tesla Cybertruck, filled it up with some sort of explosive, some sort of mortar type explosive in the back, and blew it up in front of Trump's hotel in Las Vegas. The gentleman who they're saying did this was also a military member, was a Green Beret on leave, and you can tell that they don't seem to think this guy was in that same category, because they're talking about this like, well, isn't it great that the Cybertruck saved all these lives? There's no sense of man, where are the rest of his cell? Where was he radicalized? Any of the rest of this, you're not hearing it. And I'd be willing to bet you it's because the guy probably looks about like us.
there's that, and I think too, it's been, pretty quickly established that this guy committed suicide, right? And so what's really coming out of that specifically is like this guy packed his truck up with what looks to be pretty high grade fireworks, some gasoline, and he looked to have some sort of rifle AR and then a 50 cal Desert Eagle. And those pictures were posted today. And this one seems to be such a truly bizarre coincidence, and like the fact that they were working together or not working together, but both were trained and kind of existed at the same military base at Fort Bragg or Fort Liberty now. There's some interesting coincidences, but they don't bring anything together, right? Like, I don't think these are two people working together. I don't think this has anything to do with one another. It's one of those bizarre coincidences where you have an actual attack, and then you have something that, frankly, I mean, everyone for the first few hours just thought it was a Tesla truck doing what Tesla trucks do naturally, right? So, like, this is, like, I saw, other people who have years of experience doing counter extremism research literally asking, like, do we know yet if this was a Cybertruck doing what Cybertrucks apparently sometimes do, or is it some kind of other thing? And it turned out it was a different other thing, right? Like, this just seems to be bizarre happenstance. And like, there's apparently a manifesto from the guy. There are some other things, so it does seem to have some other elements to it, but at this point there's no like direct link that anyone's brought out yet that we can see that says this is some kind of ideologically driven.
And the immediate aftermath of the whole thing was so different, just the way it got treated. It was absolutely very instructive, I think.
Yes.
And what is most troubling to me, of the many troubling things, is the level of radicalization you're seeing here, wherever it's coming from, whatever is causing it, is leading to it. I mean, these are both vets, these are both American citizens, and at least with the Cybertruck Trump Hotel attack, this guy has a wife and a kid and seems to have been leading a fairly normal life. And he did a very deliberate act of what appears to be terrorism, but how he also took the time to rent the truck, to drive the truck, it wasn't just a spur of the moment something snapped. Something happened, and these are extreme violent acts, and wherever they begin on that road to radicalization, it is happening so fast. And you're right, like there appears to be no link here, but the fact that you're having two of these hours apart, I mean, can you imagine this 10 years ago?
No,
20 years ago?
No, I mean,
this wouldn't have been happen. 10 years ago, this would have been, no.
This would have been every news channel all day for days. I mean, realistically, 10 years ago, both of these would have been all-day news events for the foreseeable future. Right? And, like, it says something about all of, where we're
all
at.
Of this.
Not just the radicalization aspect, but, like, the willful push past caring on this, right? Like, we're treating some of this the same way we've treated school shootings, which is if we don't pay attention to it, it won't happen again, when in reality it just disappears the problem. And normalizing school shootings was one step down a road, right? Normalizing what appears to be mass casualty events and really not doing the other side of this, which is having the actual conversation about what's going on here, where this is actually coming from, what is actually happening, that people are being radicalized by multiple different sources. Especially the military members.
Because that's one of the really disconcerting parts about all of this, is that it's not necessarily kids who are looking at this stuff off the internet anymore. It's people who've had explicit training on how to do some of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying.
These are grown-ass adults. These are not 17-year-olds. These are 30, 40-year-old men.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and these are trained. I mean, these, at least in the one gentleman, he was a trained war fighter.
He's a Green Beret.
Of the highest order, right? Like coming out of one of the toughest, like psychological and military training environments possible. And yeah, it's not perfect by any means, but we have I think there's some false positives that people are seeing here, right? That people are seeing, oh, well, they both rented these cars from the same app. I think that's a military thing, probably more than they chose this specifically for their action. And I think that says something more about the saturation into a space for an app.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people are misassociating that kind of thing with like some kind of connection. The connection is whatever radicalized them.
Right.
Even though they're not ideologically there's no connection there. When you radicalize that like that and you're in the military, something profound has happened, right? Like there's some profound culture here that's creating an environment where people are taking the most drastic route possible into their radicalization.
Yeah.
And that's the connection. And I think the one that a lot of people, we have to really find, because that obviously the military has its own problems, right? And obviously the military itself is an indoctrination factory. So what's going on in the process that's getting people swept?
That's a great question. Absolutely great question.
And there are multiple different right-wing camps, right? Like ISIS, if that's true, that's a right-wing group.
Oh, yeah.
That's a neo-fascist group. It's a terror org, right? And then so you have these differing shades of right-wing. And what does that say about the military itself? That the radicalization is in some cases coming from their ranks, especially when it is something like ISIS. What does that say about the way that it's already functioning inside the machinery?
It's definitely something we probably should have spent more time digging into and trying to figure out where this is coming from before we got the guy that's coming in that's going to probably ignore most of this kind of thing now that he's coming back into power. So,
or use something like what happened in New Orleans as an ideological benchmark test, right?
Right.
To like argue for ideological tests, right? Like I think there are a lot of avenues.
Well, I seem to recall reading that this guy, they talked to this guy's second wife. And I seem to recall her saying this guy wasn't a radical before very recently. Mm-hmm. Whatever this was wouldn't have stopped him from getting in the military. He was not this guy when he signed on. So people are just going down that rabbit hole so fast now. They're pilled, and then next thing you know, they're doing this kind of thing.
Well, it's a rocket sled, right? Like I think especially for new converts, it seems like you get a really fast. There appears to be a very quick radicalization arc.
And that doesn't happen in a healthy society. We have a deep rot, and it's being exposed. And again, nobody wants to have this conversation, except maybe us, somewhat reluctantly. But you got to do it. Something's wrong. This is not normal. Just remember, not normal.
No, this is very abnormal, right? Like
10 years ago, this doesn't happen.
Exactly. Now, I was about to say the same thing. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things that have a tendency to get you radicalized very fast, Trump seems to have changed his mind almost completely on the subject of TikTok. You may remember that it was supposed to be shut down or divested, and they aren't going to divest it. So the question is it going to get shut down? And Trump has now decided to say, no, I don't think so. I don't think we need to do that. Let's go ahead and take a second look at this. And it's really a dramatic reversal on where he was on this at the end of his administration. Jay, you've been looking into this. Can you talk about some of the 96 million reasons why he may have changed his mind?
Well, yeah, it seems like that might have something to do with it because if you go back to Jeffrey, yes. You had to get that in.
Yes,
Queen.
Yes, Queen.
Yes,
absolutely had to.
Yes, Jeffrey Yass, the $96 million donor to Donald Trump's campaign, who is also a major shareholder in ByteDance, the owner, the parent company of TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it, as does the fact that Yass was involved and his companies were involved in Trump Media and profited from that deal.
Shocked.
And
shocked I am.
You've got to also throw in there that on the board of Trump Media are two incoming nominees for Trump's administration, both Kash Patel, his nominee for FBI director, his QAnon adjacent nominee for
no kidding
for FBI
adjacent's
director.
Very kind way of putting that.
Well, the lawsuits are coming. I'm just being as careful as can be here.
Adjacent. Let's go with adjacent.
Adjacent's fine.
Adjacent.
Yeah,
adjacent.
Adjacent.
He may have signed a few books, but we just won't talk about what he put in those books. But we've seen the pictures. So adjacent.
Where we go one, we go
all. But yes, and you also have Linda McMahon, who is of course Trump's nominee to destroy the Department of Education. Good times.
Linda McMahon, her husband Vince is in a little bit of trouble on his own. That's a completely separate can of worms there, but
sexual assaulting friends stick together, I suppose.
It's bad. It's bad.
But look,
not good.
Look, this whole thing with TikTok, 2020, Trump came out very vehemently, made it clear he wanted to ban it. He wanted to get rid of it. He blamed it on their handling of COVID and all of that. So it made sense. And for once, Trump is going to take national security seriously, and he meant it, right?
Right.
Of course, he always means things until someone writes him a check or says something flattering about him. And he's been so hard on China's leader Xi Jinping until Xi has something nice to say about him, and then Trump has those Uyghur the genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever you want to call it, that's happening to the Uyghurs in China. Well, it's not really Trump's problem. So look, it's everything's for sale. He means something until he doesn't. The Republicans were honestly a little surprised that Biden. You remember they called him what, Beijing Biden?
Beijing Biden, China Joe. There was always that rumor that he had done business in China, that the Chinese owned him, and it just didn't play out like that.
No, he was very tough on China, and now Trump is out there bragging about the fact that he's not going to ban TikTok. I mean, the reality is he's asked the Supreme Court to stay the decision, to let him figure out a political solution. He has no authority to do this. He's not the president. He doesn't control the Supreme Court. But it's a complete 180.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, he, like you said, he tends to do this a lot, right? And I think I can't figure out yet if this is him trying to get some kind of popular, win, or if this is something he truly believes, right? Like in the sense that he did talk to someone and someone said, this is an avenue for you to gain more followers, whatever it is. There's something here that's very interesting to me because it does signal there's been a shift in someone's calculus here for whatever reason.
Right. And I mean, from a national security perspective, it's a slam dunk. ByteDance, the company, is a revolving door when it comes to the executive level between the Ministry of State Security in China and the executive level at ByteDance. Most of these people have Chinese intelligence connections, and they go back and forth. There's a reason why China does not want to sell this, because they are collecting a fuck ton of information about anybody who uses that app. And this has been documented extensively. You can see what kind of permissions the app wants. You can see what they are doing with the data that they're saving, how they've said several times, no, it's not in China. And then it's turned out to yeah, actually, well, the Chinese do have a backdoor into this. It's a risk.
Yeah.
It's objectively a national security problem here. There's no getting around that.
It is. And listen, the law in China is very clear. If you register as a company, you have to get approval from the state. And once the state approves that company, if you are any company that's working in tech, they have access to your servers whenever they want them. And they have machines that will collect all of the data that's coming into their servers, and they can, again, Ministry of State Security can access that whenever they want. So there's no questions here. There's no doubt. Maybe ByteDance is one of the good ones. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They don't have an option, a choice in the matter. But all of that is real. TikTok has, again, as honestly the best place I've seen for this remains Media Matters, the left-wing activist group that has documented the amount of misinformation and scams and attempts to sell illegal or unproven medical cures, pills, things on their site. They don't care. They do as little as possible on the moderation front. So it's bad, and all of that is concerning. But I also I think this is exposing something else that we have to talk about, which, bear with me a minute, because I think this is related to a Republican-led effort that we're seeing, especially in the South, with now 17 states banning Pornhub. And the reason is that Pornhub does not agree with these states that you should have to upload a picture and a government-issued ID in order to access porn, because Pornhub knows that data will go to places that they cannot control, and they don't believe that data merchants and everyone should have access to the porn you're looking at, which is good. But it raises the question of, why does Pornhub care more about your data than the U.S. government?
Wow. Well, I think, I mean, that's exactly right. I think you hit it on the head there. And I think, it's banning Pornhub is part of a broader mission, right, by the far right, to kind of use it as a Trojan horse, right? This is going to be used to justify really egregious abuses of people's, rights, their data, where and what they can access and how they can access it in pretty profound ways. And, between that and now today, kind of the FCC absolutely destroying net neutrality, we're in a whole new world now for how this is going to play out with, kind of censorship, quote unquote, being used to justify actual actions that look and work like censorship for people here.
Right.
And, and not because it's some kind of national security risk, but because these people literally don't believe you should have access to porn or anything that's seen as deviant, and outside the box of kind of their,
and it's porn now model. And everybody, first they came for the pornographers, and I didn't speak up because I don't use Pornhub. But then what's next? Is it information for, kids who may be questioning sexual identity, maybe questioning any number of things?
Well, and that's the general consensus for researchers, right? Is like, this is a Trojan horse to get at trans folks, LGBTQ folks overall. And, eventually you can justify this argument to say, well, you can't see multiracial content online, right? Like this actually has some really large ripples that are not necessarily right now actions, but are going to be actions in the future, right? Like, this has a temporal quality to it, where this is setting the stage for future steps, and some of them may be slow and some are going to be incredibly fast.
Yeah, it's really scary to think where this slippery slope is going to lead, and it's not going to take all that long to get there if you look at it. And yeah, I mean, Jay, that's a great question. Why does Pornhub care more about protecting Americans' data than these states seem to, because that data is not staying put. They get a hold of that, that's getting sold, that's going to end up in databases. Data brokers are going to find out about this, and then what? Where does this go?
We don't know. We don't know.
Exactly.
And we don't know when it can be used, how it could be used, and who's going to get access to it. We don't know. And yeah, the government, for all their talk of bipartisan support for banning TikTok because it's unsafe and God knows what China could do. Well, God knows where your data from Facebook went. Or
I was about to say Facebook. Yeah. Our issues with our tech companies and their alliances with our Intel community, I think probably rival or maybe surpass the ones we're concerned about with ByteDance in some ways. Not in all of them by any means, but in some ways I would assume they're very much similar problems. With that being said,
Palantir comes to mind.
Correct. Yeah. Cambridge Analytica comes to mind. I mean, realistically, like, the data is only good if you know how to use it, right? And if you're doing psychographics and you're doing stuff like that, that's a whole different league of things that's being done. And, at the end of the day, this is all justification for really our own kind of great firewall, but it's an internal one as much as an external one. And
right.
I think, seeing that we're now kind of getting a uniform attack on free information, I think that's how we have to see these as well, right? And I've always been against something like COSA because its intended goal is to harm trans kids. But all of this is kind of mimicking that argument in pretty damning ways. So, like, I think we're in a really screwed spot here, right? Because ByteDance really does have problems. There's no question there. But also, we can deal with that without harming other people, right? Like, within our own communities and within our most kind of at-risk groups here, and inviting some sort of Trojan horse conversation or legislation in is just so dangerous. And we just seem to continually have the issue of, like, trying to balance safety against intended and unintended consequences. And right now we're not even having that second conversation. We're having the first one. And it feels to me in some ways similar to, the larger argument that went on within some of the satanic panic, right? Where it's like, well, we're a society that has these problems, but how do we fix, it's not about fixing things. It's about figuring out how and why we control things. And, like, but we haven't had the second part of the conversation yet around ByteDance. That's the more important one, which is how do you rein in a problem without harming people who are going to be harmed?
Yeah, and that's a conversation that we desperately need to have at this point, but we aren't getting there anytime soon.
No.
Under any of these current circumstances.
No. The Democrats probably wouldn't have been able to do anything about it either, because they seem to be on the same train as far as, like, going after TikTok specifically.
Right.
Well, there's one thing that I did want to mention that comes to mind here is that as far as China goes, it is a very pervasive surveillance state.
Yes.
But for the most part, the Chinese people don't seem to mind too much. There are cameras on every corner. There's facial recognition software deployed in these cameras. There is a point system to determine if you are leading a good moral life and doing what the party wants. Now, look, here in the United States, right, left, center, whatever, people are not going to stand for that. We are not made the same way. We will not accept that. And the powers that be, the billionaire class, all these people know that that's true. It's just, it would lead to riots in the streets, and it would be bipartisan riots. But there are other ways to enact a form of a surveillance state, and it does have to be more covert in this country. But it is still a very real threat and a thing we have to be aware of, because they want to watch us and know what we're thinking and doing and buying as much as possible. And there need to be more protections.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, I think it's really tough because this is one of those ones we're kind of in right now, I've been talking to people kind of about how we're sitting in a place where like any actual conversations about some of this sound really kind of Charlie Day stringboard, but the reality is some of it's also being proven very true in like real time, right? Like this lawsuit that's going on with Apple, right? About Siri listening to people.
Yeah.
That's a big deal in that world, right? And like we do have a different way of doing a security state here. We sell it to you as a household aid.
Yeah.
We sell it to you as convenience, right? And so like that's the thing. All the pieces are here for something that looks a lot like China's social credit score. It just will never be that, right? Be for the reasons you said, right? Like explicitly, it'll never be explicitly put out there in that way because there will be pushback.
Surveillance state with American characteristics, and it's not going to look that way.
No, it's just going to look like you asking your fridge to order food for you and not thinking about the fact that it's listening to everything in the house, or you carrying around your cell phone, right? Like, I mean, the reality is, and we've seen this time and time again, the biggest threat we all have, if you're actually concerned about being like surveilled, is this little thing.
Yeah.
Right here. It's a cell phone. And like, we sold it to people as convenience, right? Like we can just try, the reality is like, if we're going to play the game here, it's already, the pieces are there. China is so much more bold in that they sold it to the people and the people accepted it as a actual thing because they had to. Like that's pretty bold authoritarianism.
Right.
We're dealing with something far more subtle in certain ways, but also far less thought out. Right? And piecemeal, right? And so like, I don't know, it's really, I just keep thinking about that the day after now, they did this with Pornhub. South Carolina used the exact same harmful to minors, quote unquote, argument to make it, to argue that it should be a felony, punishable by up to 10 years in jail, to view drag shows.
Yeah.
And like, they're using the exact same argument they used to ban porn. Like, the same bill with words swapped out pretty much. And like, that's the thing with this more than actually the tech side for me, is just knowing that this is a now really concerted effort to lay the groundwork for a larger argument against being, kind of not anonymous online, but like having a real free interactive experience on.
Well, and that's how the courts work in this country, right? It works on precedent. So you just have to create the precedent, make it law, make the courts uphold it, and then you just keep pushing things through that are similar enough, and you go back to that precedent, and they say, well, it's law.
Further and further and further each time.
Yep, and then the Supreme Court inevitably gets involved, right? Like, I mean, that's the actual thing, right? Like, there's steps to this where states will take it, then it'll go a level, and it'll move around a little bit, and it's just, we're playing the game differently.
Yeah, and we are seeing this stuff in real time turn into the law of the land. It's really terrifying to see. This is where we're at now.
Well, it's happening before the inauguration, right? Like, I think for a lot of people, they assumed that this was, things weren't going to happen for a while. But the reality is the things are already happening. And the sand that this is all kind of predicated on, our democratic system and our democratic society are predicated on, starting to shift in advance of the inauguration.
Yeah. Well, another thing that's kind of come up in the last while is that while the Democrats don't really have a whole lot they can say or do about any of what's going on right now to stop any of this, you would think that they would have, but apparently they don't seem to have any power anymore. They don't seem to remember they've got a president for at least another couple weeks. So they're just kind of letting it happen. And meanwhile, you're starting to see the Republicans jockeying for position.
Yes.
Trying to see who's going to have power and stroke in the new administration that's coming in. And two of the biggest players in that are Elon Musk, obviously, who's set himself up, like we talked about, as almost a shadow president at this point.
Yeah.
And then the architect of Trump's 2017 strategy, Mr. Stephen Bannon, is also trying to kind of position himself for power in the administration coming up. And they've started getting into it lately. It doesn't necessarily look like that directly, but you go on War Room and you listen to Bannon, and they are firing shots over there.
Yeah.
And the largest so far was fired by Laura Loomer, who did what she does and made a big obnoxious mess of herself while screeching about the lack of free speech on Twitter. And this isn't the first time she's done this. People who have been following these most awful people alive for a while might remember the time a few years ago that she handcuffed herself to the front door of Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
But again, that's not really what any of this is about. What we're seeing is the power struggle between Steve Bannon and Elon Musk that really centers around the idea of immigration. And specifically right now, they're talking about H-1B visas.
Yeah.
Because Elon and the rest of Silicon Valley have built their businesses on the H-1B visa model, which in a nutshell says that we need to import large numbers of skilled workers because there are no Americans capable of doing these jobs. And it doesn't hurt that these people generally make less money than an American engineer would make for doing the same work and have significantly fewer rights. They can't push back on shitty working conditions because if they do, they get their visa canceled and they have to go back to wherever they came from.
Yeah.
And Bannon and the rest of MAGA have taken absolutely great umbrage about this because they want immigration stopped completely. They don't want anybody coming into the country that's not white and European, and most of the H-1B visa workers don't qualify. They seem to be really offended that we can't somehow train Americans to do these jobs. And, to some extent, they've got a point, but it's not a point Elon cares to hear. And now he's demonetizing people like Laura Loomer who say that, suspending people who argue this point. And now you've got Loomer in full bomb thrower mode, picking up people like Curtis Yarvin, talking about the dark enlightenment. And it's like, wow, that's a deep cut, Laura. I don't know how much of your audience is going to know about this, but it's sure interesting.
Well, it also says something about Musk, right? Like if she knows enough that he's in on the dark enlightenment and the Yarvin train.
Yeah.
There's some interesting shared knowledge.
And he hasn't quite said that outright, but a lot of the things he said definitely line you up. I mean, we've got, Peter Thiel helped select JD Vance, and all of those guys are big Curtis Yarvin stans, have been for a while. And you got Bannon, who thinks it's advantageous now to blow the whistle on all of these people for being into this. And it kind of raises some interesting questions. Jay, you brought this up the other day and said, is Steve Bannon trying to do right now to Elon Musk what Jared Kushner did to Steve Bannon in 2017 after Trump won the election? Marginalize him somehow out of this whole thing?
Yeah, there was a time, and it feels like a lifetime ago, when Steve Bannon was in the White House and was, if I'm right, serving as Trump's chief of staff at the time.
Yeah, he was the chief of staff at one point.
That's right. Yeah. That was this reality, right? That's
it was.
Because it was so much has happened since then. But yeah, it was a brief about 6-month window where Bannon was in the White House, and he was, as we know, Bannon has made it his goal to destroy the administrative state, now referred to as the deep state, but by him and his audience and all of the influencers that are on their side. But look, if there is a single embodiment of MAGA, it is Steve Bannon. And he tried going into the White House. It clearly was not for him, and it was not for really anyone else. He is as much as, I won't say he's happier doing what he's doing, but he is in his element on his War Room show, doing his podcast, talking to all the people that he wants to talk to. And there is a real split here. There is a real beef. And look, if you're Bannon, you got Elon Musk on board. You played some kind of role in getting him to finance Trump's campaign and to believe that this was a partnership that would work for both of you. But I don't know that Bannon thinks they need Musk anymore. And
right.
I think that there is a wedge here that they can really exploit with Trump, because I think Trump does need Musk. He does need the money, and they're very much intertwined at this point. But Bannon and Musk are not ideologically aligned on immigration, which is a big deal for Bannon.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
both of these guys
if
is
you're
a huge
Elon
deal.
Musk, of course, if Steve Bannon hits you, you're gonna hit back. But I don't know how you get you can take Steve Bannon out of the White House, but how are you going to shut down his podcast? And how do you
You're
really hurt a guy who I don't know what he has to lose. He's going to keep talking, he's going to keep going. This is his element. And yeah, you can fire back, but I don't think Steve Bannon has any fucks left. It's just this is
man's
not
just did a big
away.
stint in prison, for God's sakes, and he's back out doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, this is some kind of internecine war, right? Like, between a couple different factions of the far right, and like what they actually see. And I think, you know, like, I just was looking, and Bannon tonight is, I guess, telling Musk right now to study modern political history and some other things. So I think, you know, there's a view here, and I think Bannon might also have a little bit of the Musk has actually got more power than me now within the White House.
Yeah.
And I think there's some of that going on. But when you have a bunch of this going on, you know, and you have two fights kind of happening side by side, especially one that's kind of tiered into the white power, you know, matrix of kind of oppression and, you know, crushing authoritarianism.
Right.
And then you have the other side, which is like, well, Musk being like, H-1B visas allow me to have an indentured servitude rank of workers. You know, these two, it's not like they're all that ideologically different.
No, I mean, both of these guys want to smash the state. They're just arguing about exactly what kind of stuff they want to replace it with. You know, do we want a techno-authoritarian managerial thing, or do we want a populist king type of setup? And
and I have to assume that's Bannon's fear, right? Like, he's the populist, right-wing populism guy, and Musk represents something totally different, which is like a more monarchistic and truly different kind of authoritarian vision for everything. And the fact that they know, you know, that Loomer's talking about the Dark Enlightenment and these things also says that Bannon's done some of his reading on what these guys are. Versus
Bannon's known this since 2017. He used to have some of these people on the show.
I was going to say, this is not new to him, right? Like, this is something that he is entirely in depth with.
And Politico was reporting that he was talking to Curtis Yarvin when he was in the White House in 2017. So, I mean, you're not a babe in the woods about this stuff, Steve. I mean, you obviously have a very good idea of what this is all about. And the fact that you want to blast these people now says something to the effect of like, wow, I'm really, really threatened by what these guys want to do. So I'm looking for an in.
Yep. Yeah. That's my view. Right. And I think, you know, I've been wondering privately if this is a signal that Trump has actually become more dangerous, right? That he's moved past the need for someone like Bannon because now he's actually secured control of the thing he wanted, which was power.
Right.
And if that's the case, that actually is the much more dangerous track for us to be on, because Musk and those guys are not populists.
Well, and that leads in...
They're fascists, and they have one goal.
Right. And that leads into my next question. And this was sort of the mind-blowing thought that I had when I read all this was, does Trump need MAGA anymore? Does he actually need this for anything besides his own ego gratification? Because if you think about this, he's not going to run again. He's been elected as many times as he's going to be. We hope that somehow he walks away from it after this, but he doesn't need to win another fair election. He doesn't.
But he he does need the validation. I
Yes.
agree with you, and I know we've talked about this. He is desperate for people to cheer. The crowd sizes, those memes, those comments.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it really does bother him. His ego has to constantly be massaged, and he has to be reassured and told that he's done a good job and been a good boy. All of that is important to him. But you're right, at the end of the day, if we hope, he leaves office and he has to go back to private life, not all of these lawsuits and these investigations, some of them are not gone. They are just paused. And he's going to need money, but he's also going to need support. He's going to need people to still go out and cheer for him and tell him that he's okay and they are still with him and the movement is still alive. So he needs both. I mean, the money is probably more important realistically, but Trump being Trump, he needs both. I do think also, look, Steve Bannon is a lot of things. He's not stupid. He knows, look, if you're going to keep MAGA, if you're going to keep the base on side, a lot of the stuff that Musk is doing and plans to do is really risky. And it really is going to alienate them, and it could go in directions that they can't control.
Right.
And it will
go in directions they can't control. Right. Like ultimately that's the thing. This is a chaos machine.
Right. Yeah. And they can't necessarily predict which direction this is going to go. Wherever it ends up going on that side of things, Elon is probably okay with. Musk is probably okay with all of this. Bannon is probably a lot less okay with this, because I think he's just looking at it and seeing himself and his power base marginalized. Like he spent all this time working towards his vision of a post-democracy, whatever that is.
Well, and that's the thing. They're all already thinking about what comes next.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's the thing. They're thinking, what's the next thing we do? What is our next goal, right? Because ultimately they have achieved their goal of getting Trump reelected. And I think, Griff, the question, does Trump need MAGA? I think we're going to find out.
Yeah.
I think with what Musk is saying, with what Trump has said, and now what some of his advisors or purported advisors have said, they're going to try and crush people, right, under some economic avalanches here. And I think, looking at what Bannon has been saying, where he looks like he's trying to attempt to flank from the left, saying some pretty incredible anti-billionaire, anti-wealth class stuff, and kind of saying, like, we have to be on top of this. He understands the thing as well as anyone right now, which is like the sentiment is actually on the side that's opposing the wealth class. The sentiment, it's going to be very hard for them to keep this alliance together, especially the MAGA base, when people are getting hammered economically in a way that they never have been. Right. And I think some of Bannon's calculation is probably understanding that, right? Like just him looking at what Musk is saying, what Trump and co have planned economically and with banking reforms and repealing certain things. And then you look at, I'm sure Bannon is looking at polling and different things and looking at his internal data that he has and saying, oh shit. This is a landmine field, right? And for Trump and them, they would have to be very adept to walk through that landmine field and make it out okay. And Musk does not have the ability to walk through that minefield.
No, it's not what he does.
No.
That's just not him at all.
No, he drives an Escalade through it.
Well, and you're right, with Bannon coming at people, flanking them from the left.
Yeah.
He has to have some awareness that as the economic hardship hits people, they are going to be potentially swayed and brought over to the dark, evil leftist side. If the left can make enough convincing economic arguments to tell them, look, here's really what's going on. Here's really what the problem is, and we have to do something about it. And part of it is Bannon tactically knowing, hey, we have to keep these people in our camp. And if you keep telling them that economic hardship is coming, they're not just going to stay with us and be unwavering forever.
No, right. And like that's the thing, right? For this kind of thing, so it's really hard to maintain a conspiracy theory that can actually answer that question for people who are experiencing it. It's a lot simpler for someone to say, look, the wealth class just fucked you. And they robbed every one of us who is on the same friggin' boat while they're on a yacht. And that message...
That resonates.
It's simple. It's simple, and it's more simple than the conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory, this is one of the rare times where the simplicity of a conspiracy theory, how it flattens down, and decontextualizes and breaks all these things apart. This is one of the rare times where the reality is much simpler than that conspiracy theory, and you actually can't construct a conspiracy theory that's simple enough, that's effective.
Right.
To counter the actual reality that, like, me saying Musk just robbed your parents blind out of their Social Security so he could get more wealthy is a lot easier for people to take in than, like, radical Marxists have taken over, whatever crazy thing that comes out of them. It's done. And that's where Bannon's got to be freaked out, right? Because if he can't get ahead of that, you're done. It's over.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah, you're right. All you have to do is show someone, look, here's Elon Musk's net worth.
Yeah.
Before Trump, and here's his net worth after Trump. And then you just go down the list of Vivek and JD Vance and every single one of these billionaires who make up part of his cabinet, or you've got his nominee for Borders are bragging about the contracts they're going to give out. They're not hiding it. It's numbers.
The corruption,
it's numbers.
That's the thing. The corruption is out in the open, which is actually a supremely dangerous soft spot for them, is that they're being so bold in their corruption, the economic stuff, the money. And if people really start to talk about this, right, in the way that they should be, and framing it in the way they should be, which is a kleptocratic group of wealthy individuals coming together to rob us, that message, that's way easier to digest than, like, whatever Ben Shapiro is putting out there.
The oligarchs fucked you. Here's how much money they made. How are you doing? How's your net worth?
You win elections on, this dude made $650 billion while you and the rest of America lost $200 trillion.
Yeah.
Whose fault is it that you just got robbed? Because it's theirs. And you literally, it's an automatic target. And in this country, we talked about it last week. In this country, this is one of the rare across all demographics, topics that brings people together to say, you know what? No more. And that may be more powerful than MAGA's magnetism of racism, resentment, anger, and unreality, right? Like, it may be able to break that, but it means that people like us and others who are out in communities that are deeply affected have to understand the message. This is one of the rare moments where KISS, keep it simple, stupid, is the entire message.
Yeah.
You don't need to give them any technocratic bullshit. You just go out and you tell them it's their fault. This is how we would do it better. And we don't think you should get robbed just because they think you're a cash machine for their narcissism. Literally just start laying it out in those terms. And like, oh, you can't afford a new car? Elon Musk just bought his 7th $40 million plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he can fly between meetings at the Trump White House and Trump's other house in Florida. and you just start laying it out. I mean, this is one that for Bannon, it's got to be horrifyingly scary because the messaging against them will be more effective than their messaging against us.
Right. This is not going to be trumped by social issues or trans kids or any of that. They're not going to be able to, culture war their way out of this messaging at this point if they keep going in this direction.
No, and if they really pick up the socialism part of National Socialism, then we're in a lot more trouble. That's what scared me about Bannon, and he's A/B testing things. Right. And he's been trying the wealth class thing. It doesn't work for him, but if he figures out how to crack it, that's dangerous in a way that we just
sure is.
We don't have any kind of gauge for if they get that one. I don't think they do, not at least in the short term, just because it's so clear who's beholden to who and who, is taking billionaire bucks. It was a lot easier Trump's first time for him to claim he's a populist because he did it off of small donations or smaller donations in part, not all the way across, but in part. And this time,
not so much.
He didn't. He was purchased by a billionaire.
They purchased by pocket change. I mean, Elon Musk
the change in Elon Musk's couch. Yeah.
Right. And it was, even if he threw it away and nothing came of it, it's money that he'll never miss. He doesn't need. It's like nothing to him.
He's made it back plus dividends.
Plus, yes, many times over. It was well worth the investment, and it's going to keep paying off for him
until it doesn't.
It
may not.
And that's our job.
Like, this is one of those. This is a rare one where we do have some actual moments where we may clear some of this up because it'll take itself out.
We'll cross our fingers at this point because we need this to happen. Things are about to get real dark in this place. So any light we can get our eyes on is a good thing. And folks, that's our show for the week. Thank you for tuning in, and remember to like and subscribe on your content platform of choice. We will see you next week. And remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.
It's true.
Bye now.
Peace.